This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Welcome to our new patrons this week, Thomas Bach, Grayson Angeles, and Jeremy Smith. Visit our Patreon page and vote for next week's video. It's often been said that certain directors go for style over substance. Quentin Tarantino is no stranger to this accusation. And although we certainly believe his movies are better described as stylized substance, what's true is that he usually puts style in front of realism. This doesn't make his movies worse at all. It's just one of the many traits of the director's own style, and one of the big characteristics of that style is violence. It's even perhaps his biggest trait, and it's gotten him quite a bit of attention. The good and bad kinds of attention. His movies create an impact, and his use of violence in them is an important reason for the response his films get. Today we'll explore the history of violence in film, and how Tarantino uses it in his own movies.
Know that there's nothing sadistic in my actions.
Before we continue, we must make a quick distinction between violence and graphic violence. Movies have always been violent, and all kinds of art have been violent since the beginning of time. In the case of film, let's take an old western as an example. The Great Train Robbery from 1903 is one of the earliest examples we can look at. In the film, a shootout ensues and a cowboy gets shot. He raises his arms as a painful expression, falls to the ground, and supposedly dies. This is a violent scene, maybe as violent as a scene can get. Murder has been shown in film since its earliest stages, so no, movies haven't gotten more violent. What has changed, though, is how this violence is presented. That feeling that movies have gotten more violent is due to violence's closest cousin, graphic violence. The difference between the two is the actual vivid, brutal, and often realistic depiction of violence.
Hey, Paul!
Movies have gotten increasingly graphically violent with time. Detractors of graphic violence in film will say that it's a relatively cheap way of keeping audiences entertained, since it's easier than ever to show real-life type violence in movies. It's true that audiences readily respond to graphic violence in film. Thus the rising popularity of splatter films, splatstick with films such as Evil Dead 2, and more recently the torture porn trend of the 2000s. This increase is partly due to the evolution of technology and filmmaking. Movies probably need violence to work, since it often acts as a catalyst for the story to take off. Usually the protagonist needs that little push to get the story going. Even movies that we don't really consider violent are pretty damn violent. In Star Wars, for example, Luke finally decides to go to Alderaan until after he finds out the Empire turned his uncle and aunt into action figures. The point is, movie characters rely on violent events happening around them. Without violence, what would our heroic protagonist go after? And since we're constantly bombarded with real-life violence, movie violence doesn't sound too bad. It gives stories a moral compass and lets the heroes go after a righteous cause. And best of all, there are no real consequences to it. You may see a movie where people get stabbed, shot, mutilated, and killed, but we know that actor will probably be just fine. Violence can provide just the right amount of escapism as well. How many times have you seen the good guy take on hordes of bad guys and come out without a single scratch? Viewers that want to escape from a grim reality or traumatizing event may very well find this relieving.
My name is Shoshana Dreyfus, and this is the face of Jewish vengeance.
The modern director that really likes to play around with graphic violence in his movies is Quentin Tarantino.
Why do you like making violent movies?
It's like asking Judd Apatow, why do you like making comedies?
There's definitely something about the use of violence in his films that's distinctively different from other filmmakers. Tarantino was introduced to audiences with the release of his first feature film, Reservoir Dogs, in 1992, which is a film that's very stylistically violent. This was the first time we ever saw the director's take on violence, and from that movie alone we can actually deduce the main characteristics of his use of it in most of his work. Reservoir Dogs has a certain casual, easygoing coolness to the way it uses violence, which was something that hadn't really been seen before. The most famous scene in the movie, for example, has Mr. Blonde, played by Michael Madsen, torturing a cop as he dances to the tune of Stuck in the Middle with You by Stealers Wheel. This contrast between what's going on screen and how it's handled by the director is one of the main traits of Tarantino's work, making a serious topic seem funny.
I want to play you as an audience. I want to be the conductor, and you're my orchestra. Laugh, laugh, stop laughing. Stop laughing, laugh.
Having a socially incorrect situation and making that situation funny or entertaining for the audience is one of the oldest tricks in Tarantino's book.
Well, you gotta have an opinion. I mean, do you think that God came down from heaven and stopped? Oh, what the fuck's happening? Oh, man, shit, man. Oh, man, I shot Marvin in the face. Why the fuck you do that?
Another example of murder being presented in a darkly humorous way is when the sheriff gets killed by Christoph Waltz's character in Django. The sheriff is later revealed to be a wanted man, but during the actual scene itself, there are certainly cues that Tarantino gives us to remind us not to take the violence too seriously. It's like him saying,
well, it's a movie. It's a fantasy. It's a fantasy. It's not real life.
However, this isn't to say that it's all laughs and games. The slave fight scene or the dog scene in Django are actually expertly used to provide some social commentary on slavery. These two scenes aren't humorous at all. The only humor in the scene is by Leonardo DiCaprio's character Calvin Candy, cheering at the atrocities of the fight, but it's shot in a way that tells us just how inhumane the slave trade was and the activities people enjoyed for recreation. So, as for the dark humor, in a certain way Tarantino forces us to have fun by using visual cues and music, so if we're having fun, the violence hopefully isn't taken too seriously. Another aspect that helps his films shed some seriousness is how ridiculously excessive his movies can get.
Starting to see pictures, ain't you?
The obvious example here is in Kill Bill. There is no way in hell someone can even get close to bleeding like that. Whenever a limb is severed, which happens quite often in this movie, a fountain of blood sprays out of the body. It's very excessive, stylish, and undeniably fun. By intentionally keeping the violence obviously over the top, viewers are once again reminded of a simple yet important fact. It's just a movie. As it was mentioned before, humor is a big component of Tarantino's violence, and a way he can keep his movies light is through dialogue around violent actions. For example, every major character in Pulp Fiction gets a humorous introduction right before they're about to do something violent.
This is a robbery!
Any of you fucking pricks move! And I'll execute every motherfucking last one of you!
Pumpkin and Honey Bunny are having a casual conversation about robbing banks and liquor stores. Vince and Jules are having another casual conversation about
Royale with cheese.
and foot massages right before they're about to go smoke some fools, yo.
What? Say what again?
And Butch is having a dream or a flashback with Christopher Walken delivering one of the funniest monologues in movie history,
I hid this uncomfortable hunk of metal up my ass 2 years.
right before he kills another man in the ring. And speaking of dialogue, after the Crazy 88 fight, for example, there's only one goon left, revealed to be a teenager whom Uma Thurman just spanks with her sword, telling him to
Go home to your mother!
This also serves as a quick laugh to remind us not to take this too seriously. And adding to the whole casual coolness of affairs, the most violent characters in Tarantino's movies are often the most intelligent and interesting characters in the movie.
I'ma get medieval on your ass.
And these characters often seek revenge against an oppressor. This can be against slave owners or racist generals, but it's not always rooting for oppressed members of society. It could also be a woman who was wronged seeking revenge against an evil man. This is a good way to make us care for the character's cause and enjoy their retribution. In Tarantino's universe, the brutality of violence and murder is always infused with a potion of style and coolness, which is a big separator between what happens on the big screen and what happens in real life. Violence is all around us. It's on the internet, it's on TV, it's in the newspaper. We're constantly being reminded of the brutality of the human experience, so it's only natural that violence would eventually transcend into the big screen. But is there a fundamental reason why humans enjoy experiencing violence in general? Probably not, because the cinematic experience is a highly individual one. It may very well be that we just find violence attractive in a certain way. Maybe we're just inherently evil, sadistic, and violent creatures, and a good way to get rid of our natural impulses without acting on them is to experience them through a television screen. The intention of this analysis certainly wasn't to answer if movie violence leads to real-life violence, but with the arguments presented here, we think that we can safely say that there is a clear distinction between the two. Film violence can definitely be enjoyed, without feeling guilty or having the need to go out there and commit violent acts. But there is one thing that we can be sure of.
Why the need for so much gruesome, graphic violence? Why not let us imagine
Because
a little
it's so
of it?
much fun, Chan. Get it?
Hey, how's it going everybody? As always, thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this new video. And if you're new to the channel, you can click on that big red subscribe button and on the bell icon that appears next to it so you don't miss any uploads from us. We usually upload a video like this one every week.
Ooh, that's a bingo!
And we want to give a huge shout out to our supporters on Patreon. You really help us a lot, and it's a big deal for us that you're interested in seeing this channel grow and succeed. That being said, if you're not familiar with Patreon, it's a great website where you can support our channel so we can make more videos for you guys. Besides, if you join the club, we'll give you some cool exclusive benefits in return. Even $1 helps very much. So if you enjoy our videos and would like to help us out a little more, the link should appear on screen and in the description box below. That's it for this video, take care, and we'll see you next week.